During a deadly flood, a Millionaire CEO heard a baby crying. When people discovered why he did it, tears streamed down their faces. Marcus Thompson stood at his office window on the 32nd floor, watching Palm Beach disappear under sheets of rain. His phone buzzed again, another emergency alert about the tropical storm. He deleted it without reading, just like the others. "Mr. Thompson, the parking garage is already flooding. We should leave now." Sarah, his assistant, stood at his office door, her hands clutching her tablet like a shield. "Go home, Sarah. I'll finish up here." Marcus didn't turn around. Below, people rushed through the streets, expensive suits ruined as they fought against the wind. "But Sir Dash, I said go home." His voice was firm but not unkind. He heard her heels click away, followed by the ding of the elevator. Thunder cracked outside. Marcus checked his Patek Philippe watch, 4:47 p.m. The quarterly report still needed his review before tomorrow's board meeting. He walked back to his desk, Italian leather shoes silent against the carpet. The power flickered. Marcus saved the document he was working on and switched to his laptop's battery. Water streamed down the windows in sheets now, turning the world outside into a blur of gray and black. His phone rang. "Thompson speaking." "Marcus, it's Richard from the board. Meeting's cancelled tomorrow. No one's getting through this storm. We can do it virtually, Dash. For God's sake, Marcus, look outside. Go home before it gets worse." The line went dead. Marcus put down his phone and loosened his tie. The storm had cost him a full day of work. He started packing his laptop. That's when he heard it. At first, he thought it was the wind, a high-pitched whine through the building's steel frame. But then it came again, clearer this time. A cry. Marcus froze, his hand hovering over his laptop bag. The sound hit something deep in his memory. Tile floors, metal beds, the echo of children crying in the night. "Not now," he muttered, pressing his palms against his temples. 28 years since the orphanage, and still the memories ambushed him at the worst moments. The cry came again, weaker this time. Marcus walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. The streets below had turned into rivers. Cars sat abandoned, water up to their windows. Palm trees bent sideways in the wind. There, between two buildings across the street, something floating in the water. Something white. His phone buzzed. "Emergency alert. Flash flood warning. Seek higher ground immediately." The crying stopped. Marcus grabbed his phone and ran to the elevator. The doors opened with a cheerful ding that felt out of place in the empty office. He jabbed the lobby button repeatedly. Come on. Come on." In the lobby, water had already seeped under the front doors, forming pools on the marble floor. The security guard looked up from his desk. "Sir, you can't go out there. Police just ordered everyone to stay inside." Marcus ignored him, pushing through the revolving door into the storm. The wind nearly knocked him off his feet. Rain stung his face like needles. The water was already knee-deep, rushing down the street like a river. His $1,000 suit was ruined in seconds. Marcus didn't care. He fought against the current, heading toward where he'd seen the white shape. "Hey, are you crazy?" someone shouted from a doorway. "Get inside." The crying started again, closer now. Marcus's shoes slipped on something underwater, probably a curb. He stumbled, caught himself. The water was up to his thighs now, ice-cold through his pants. Lightning flashed, illuminating the street in stark white. There, between the flooded cars, something white bobbing in the water. The crying grew louder. Marcus pushed forward, his legs burning from fighting the current. His foot hit something solid underwater. He reached down, found a fire hydrant. Used it to anchor himself. 10 feet away now. The white shape came into focus, a plastic laundry basket, half submerged. Inside, wrapped in a soaked blanket, a baby screamed at the sky. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered. He lunged forward, grabbing the basket before the current could sweep it away. The baby's cry cut through the storm's roar, hungry, scared, alive. Its dark skin was cold to the touch. Marcus lifted the child out of the basket, cradling it against his chest. The baby's cries softened slightly at his touch. Water streamed down both their faces. "I've got you," Marcus said, though the wind tore the words away. "I've got you." He shrugged off his suit jacket, wrapped it around the baby. The current was stronger now, pulling at his legs. They needed shelter, fast. Marcus turned back toward his building, holding the baby high above the rising water. Lightning split the sky again. In its flash, he saw other faces watching from windows above, dozens of them, pressed against the glass, watching the man in the expensive suit saving a baby from the flood. The baby squirmed against his chest, its cries growing weaker. Marcus held it tighter and started walking, one step at a time through the flood, back towards solid ground. He didn't know what he'd do when he got there. Didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in 28 years, the memories of the orphanage didn't feel like a weight around his neck. They felt like a guide, showing him exactly what needed to be done. Sarah was waiting in the lobby, phone in hand. Her eyes widened when she saw them. Her boss, soaked to the skin, cradling a crying baby. "Mr. Thompson, I called 911, but they said emergency services are overwhelmed. They can't dash." She stopped, staring at the baby. "Is that?" "Call Dr. Chen," Marcus said, water pooling around his feet on the marble floor. "Tell him to meet us at my condo. Now." "But the police dash." "Now, Sarah." She nodded and started dialing. Marcus looked down at the baby, who had stopped crying and was now just whimpering softly. Its eyes were starting to close. "Stay with me, little one," he whispered. "Stay with me." Outside, the storm raged on. But in that moment, watching the child fight to stay awake in his arms, Marcus Thompson, CEO, millionaire, former orphan, felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. He felt needed. The security guard appeared with a blanket from his emergency kit. Marcus wrapped it around the baby, replacing his soaked jacket. The child's breathing was steady but shallow. "My car's in the underground garage," Sarah said, hanging up her phone. "Dr. Chen will meet us at your place in 20 minutes. Marcus nodded. "Let's go." As they walked toward the garage elevator, he could feel the baby's heartbeat against his chest. Strong, determined, like the child knew it had been saved. Or maybe, Marcus thought as the elevator doors closed, like it knew it had done some saving of its own. Sarah's BMW crawled through the flooded streets, wipers fighting a losing battle against the rain. Marcus sat in the back, still holding the baby. Every few seconds, he checked its breathing. "How much further?" he asked, his voice tight. 5 minutes, if we don't hit any flooded sections." Sarah swerved around an abandoned car. "The baby's still breathing." "Yes, but its skin feels cold." The car's headlights caught waves of water rushing down Ocean Boulevard. Palm trees thrashed in the wind like desperate swimmers. A traffic light swung wildly overhead, its signals meaningless in the chaos. Marcus looked down at the child. Dark eyes stared back at him, too tired to cry now. The security guard's blanket was already soaked through. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah's voice cut through his thoughts. "What exactly are we going to tell Dr. Chen? The truth? And the police?" Marcus didn't answer. The image of the basket floating in the flood waters flashed through his mind. Who puts a baby in a basket during a storm? The answer made his jaw clench. The car hit a deep puddle, sending water over the hood. Sarah swore under her breath. "Maybe we should have called an ambulance instead," she said. "They are not coming." "You heard the dispatcher." Marcus shifted the baby to his other arm. "Chen will know what to do." Thunder cracked overhead. The baby flinched, its tiny fingers grabbing Marcus's shirt. Without thinking, he started humming an old song from the orphanage, something about rain and sunshine. Sarah caught his eye in the rearview mirror but said nothing. They turned onto Marcus's street. The Palm Royal condominiums rose ahead, 40 stories of steel and glass fighting against the storm. Water coursed down its sides like tears. "The parking garage is flooded," the security guard said through Sarah's window. "You'll have to use the front entrance." Sarah pulled up to the covered walkway. Marcus was out before she could fully stop, clutching the baby against his chest. "I'll park somewhere safe," she called after him. "Call me if you need anything." The lobby was empty except for James, the night doorman. His eyes widened at the sight of Marcus, the CEO's expensive suit ruined, his hair plastered to his forehead, holding a baby wrapped in a security blanket. "Mr. Thompson? Should I call someone?" "Dr. Chen is coming. Send him up immediately." Marcus headed for the private elevator, leaving wet footprints on the marble floor. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt endless. The baby had started shivering. Marcus held it closer, trying to share what little warmth he had left. Almost there, he whispered. Hold on. Memory hit him like a punch. Another elevator, 28 years ago. Him at 7 years old, clutching a small backpack, riding up to meet his adoptive parents for the first time. The same fear in his stomach. The same uncertainty. The elevator door was opened directly into his penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the storm raging outside, lightning illuminating the angry ocean beyond. Marcus carried the baby straight to the master bathroom. He grabbed every towel he owned, laying them on the heated marble floor. Carefully, he unwrapped the wet blankets. The baby was a boy, maybe 8 months old. No injuries that Marcus could see. No identification. Just a dirty diaper and a thin Odyssey with cartoon elephants. Okay, little guy, let's get you warm. Marcus stripped off his own wet jacket and shirt. He held the baby against his bare chest, wrapping them both in dry towels. Skin-to-skin contact. He'd read about it somewhere, though he couldn't remember where. The baby's shivering slowly subsided. His breathing steadied. A sharp knock at the front door made them both jump. It's open, Marcus called. Dr. Chen hurried in, medical bag in hand. He stopped short at the sight of Marcus sitting shirtless on the bathroom floor, cradling a baby. When your assistant called, I thought she was joking, Chen said, kneeling beside them. Where did you find him? Floating in a basket on 3rd Street. Nobody else was around. Chen pulled out his stethoscope. May I? Marcus nodded, loosening his hold on the baby. The doctor worked quickly, checking vitals, temperature, reflexes. The baby stayed quiet, watching them both with wide eyes. He's slightly hypothermic, but nothing serious, Chen said finally. No water in the lungs. No obvious injuries. He's actually in surprisingly good health, considering, so he'll be okay. Yes. But Marcus, Chen sat back on his heels. You know we had to call the authorities. I know. They'll want to know why you didn't call them first. Marcus looked down at the baby, who had grabbed his finger in a tiny fist. Would they have reached him in time? Chen sighed. Probably not. Not in this storm. He reached into his bag. Let me give him something for the cold. Then we'll talk about next steps. While Chen prepared a children's fever reducer, Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Police scanner says rescue operation suspended until storm passes. All emergency services focused on critical infrastructure. Marcus deleted the message. The baby was sucking on the medicine dropper, his color already better. He needs formula, Chen said, packing up his bag. And diapers. And proper clothes. I can have my wife bring some. Our grandson is about his size. Thank you. Marcus stood carefully, still holding the baby. For everything. Chen paused at the bathroom door. Marcus, what are you planning to do with him? Keep him safe until the storm passes. After that, he looked out the window at the chaos below. After that, we'll see. The doctor nodded slowly. I'll be back in an hour with supplies. Try to keep him warm and calm. And Marcus? Yes. Whatever you're thinking, remember who you are. Your position. Your responsibilities. I remember exactly who I am, Marcus said quietly. That's why I couldn't leave him out there. After Chen left, Marcus carried the baby into the living room. The storm had intensified, rain hammering against the windows like bullets. In the distance, transformers exploded, sending blue-white flashes across the sky. The baby started fussing again, probably hungry. Marcus walked him around the penthouse, humming that old orphanage song. Each time they passed the windows, he caught glimpses of their reflection. The Millionaire CEO in his ruined suit pants, holding a baby he'd pulled from a flood. His phone buzzed again. Probably Richard from the board, or Sarah with more updates. He ignored it. You know something, he said to the baby, who was fighting sleep. I always thought this place was too big for one person. Too empty. He touched the baby's cheek gently. Maybe you're helping me figure out why. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the penthouse, for the first time in years, Marcus Thompson didn't feel alone. Dr. Chen's wife arrived exactly 1 hour later, carrying 2 full bags of baby supplies. Her hair was soaked despite the umbrella she clutched. Where is he? She asked, brushing past Marcus into the penthouse. Her eyes found the baby dozing in Marcus's arms. Oh, you poor thing. She pulled out a fresh diaper, baby formula, and clean clothes. Marcus watched as she expertly changed the baby, her movements quick and practiced. When was the last time you changed a diaper? Mr. Thompson? Never. She smiled. Well, you're about to learn. Come here. For the next 20 minutes, Mrs. Chen taught Marcus the basics. How to mix formula, check its temperature, change a diaper without making a mess. The baby took the bottle eagerly, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. He trusts you, Mrs. Chen said softly. Before Marcus could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID read Palm Beach Police Department. Mr. Thompson. A woman's voice, professional but tired. This is Detective Lisa Martinez. We received a report about a baby. Marcus shifted the baby to his shoulder, patting his back like Mrs. Chen had shown him. Yes, I understand you found him during the flood? On 3rd Street. He was in a basket, floating in the water, and you didn't call emergency services immediately because they weren't coming. I checked. A pause. We'll need you to bring him to the station as soon as the storm clears. He's just fallen asleep. Dr. Chen already checked him out. He's fine here for now. Mr. Thompson. Her voice hardened slightly. You can't just keep a found child in your home. There are procedures. I understand. But right now, he's warm, fed, and safe. The streets are flooded. Where exactly would you like me to take him? Another pause. Longer this time. Marcus could hear radio chatter in the background. Fine. First thing tomorrow morning, you bring him in. And Mr. Thompson? Don't get attached. This isn't a stray puppy you found. The line went dead. Marcus put down his phone and looked at Mrs. Chen, who was pretending not to listen as she organized baby supplies. She's right. You know, Mrs. Chen said gently. I know. The baby stirred against his shoulder, making small snuffling sounds in his sleep. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to weaken, the wind dying down to a dull roar. Mrs. Chen packed up her things. Call if you need anything else. And Marcus. She touched his arm. Whatever happens tomorrow, you did a good thing today. After she left, Marcus walked the penthouse with the sleeping baby. Every surface reflected their image, the successful executive and the abandoned child. Like a before and after photo he never knew he needed to see. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. News crews outside the building. Stories getting out. Marcus walked to the window. Sure enough, he could see the news vans parked along the street, their satellite dishes raised against the fading storm. The baby whimpered in his sleep. Marcus adjusted him carefully, remembering how the orphanage nurses used to comfort the younger children during storms. He whispered, "You're safe." Thunder rumbled in the distance. Marcus started humming again, that same old song. The baby settled. His phone lit up with another call, social services this time. Marcus let it go to voicemail. They'd have plenty to say tomorrow, he was sure. About protocols and procedures. About proper channels and paperwork. But tonight was just about keeping this little one safe. A knock at his door made him jump. He opened it to find Sarah, her makeup smeared but her tablet still clutched professionally in her hands. They found his mother, she said without preamble. Marcus's arms tightened around the baby. Where? Hospital. Hypothermia. She's homeless. Been living under the 3rd Street Bridge. Left him near St. Michael's Church before the storm hit. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. She thought someone would find him faster there. She didn't know about the flood warning. Is she okay? She will be. But Marcus. Sarah looked at the baby, then back at him. She signed preliminary abandonment papers at the hospital. Said she couldn't take care of him anymore. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He looked down at the sleeping child in his arms, thought of another mother, 28 years ago, signing similar papers. His name is Thomas, Sarah added softly. Thomas Walker. He's 8 months old. Thomas, Marcus repeated. The baby stirred at his name but didn't wake. Social services will place him in emergency foster care tomorrow. They've already started the paperwork. Sarah hesitated. Unless what? Unless someone else volunteers to foster him. Someone with resources. Stability. She met his eyes. A spare room with a view of the ocean. Marcus walked to the windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky streaked with purple and orange. Below, the floodwaters were already receding, leaving debris and broken dreams in their wake. I'm not father material, Sarah. Says who? The board? The papers? She stepped closer. The same people who said a kid from an orphanage couldn't run a Fortune 500 company. Thomas shifted in his sleep, his small hand grabbing Marcus's shirt. Like he was answering for him. It's not that simple. It never is. Sarah headed for the door. But maybe that's not the point. After she left, Marcus sat in his favorite armchair, Thomas still sleeping soundly against his chest. The penthouse felt different now. Less like a showpiece and more like something else. Something he hadn't felt since his adoptive parents passed away. His phone buzzed again. Social services, probably, or the police, or the board, wondering why their CEO was all over social media, carrying a baby through a flood. Marcus ignored it. Instead, he watched the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in colors he'd never really noticed before. Thomas breathed steadily against him, safe and warm and completely unaware that he'd just changed a man's life forever. Thomas Walker, Marcus whispered, testing the name. Testing something else too? Though he wasn't ready to admit it yet. Outside his window, Palm Beach was already starting to rebuild. Inside, something else was being built too. Something unexpected and terrifying and possibly wonderful. Marcus Thompson, the millionaire CEO who had everything, finally had something worth more than all of it combined. A choice. Marcus woke to unfamiliar sounds, soft cooing, tiny movements. For a moment, he was disoriented. Then he remembered the storm, the flood, Thomas. He'd fallen asleep in the armchair. Thomas still nestled against his chest. Early morning light streamed through the windows. His phone showed 27 missed calls. "Good morning, little guy," he said as Thomas stirred. "Ready to face the world?" A text from Sarah flashed on his screen. "Turn on the news. Now." Marcus grabbed the remote, keeping Thomas steady with one arm. Every local channel showed the same footage. Him, wading through the flood waters, lifting Thomas above his head. The headlines varied. Millionaire CEO rescues abandoned baby from flood. Palm Beach executives heroic storm rescue. Questions arise over CEO's involvement with abandoned child. "Great," Marcus muttered. Thomas grabbed at his tie in response. His phone rang. "Detective Martinez. I assume you've seen the news," she said when he answered. "Just now. We need you at the station." 1 hour. Marcus looked down at Thomas, who was attempting to eat his tie. "He needs breakfast first. Mr. Thompson." Her voice softened slightly. "I know you care about the child. But the longer you delay, the harder this will be. For everyone." 1 hour, Marcus agreed and hung up. He changed Thomas's diaper, following Mrs. Chen's instructions from memory. The baby watched him with curious eyes, giggling when Marcus made a face at the smell. "Yeah, laugh it up," Marcus said, but he was smiling too. Sarah arrived as he was attempting to dress Thomas in one of the outfits Mrs. Chen had brought. "The lobby's full of reporters," she said, taking over the dressing process. "And the board wants an emergency meeting at noon." "Of course they do." Marcus watched her easily snap up the baby's honesty. "How bad is it?" "Depends who you ask. Half the city thinks you're a hero. The other half." She hesitated. "What?" "They are asking questions. About your motives. Why you took him home instead of to authorities. Whether you're trying to buy good publicity for the firm." Thomas chose that moment to reach for Marcus, tiny hands grabbing at the air. Marcus picked him up without thinking. "If they only knew," Sarah said quietly. "Knew what?" "That you still have nightmares about the orphanage." Marcus stared at her. In 15 years, he'd never told her about the dreams. "You talk in your sleep sometimes," she explained. During late nights at the office. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed. Richard from the board. "Marcus? We've got a situation." "I know, Richard. I'll be at the meeting dash." "No, worse than that. Someone leak your adoption records to the press." Marcus sat down hard, clutching Thomas closer. "What?" "It's already online. CEO's own orphanage past revealed. The stock's dropping. Because I was adopted. Because you didn't disclose it. Because it looks like you're using this baby situation to spin some kind of redemption story." Richard sighed. "Look, just come to the meeting. We'll figure this out." The line went dead. Marcus looked at Sarah, who was already typing furiously on her tablet. "I'll handle the press," she said. "You handle the police." "And Marcus?" She met his eyes. "Don't let them see you shake." The elevator ride to the lobby felt like descending into chaos. Camera flashes started before the doors fully opened. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Thompson, did your own adoption influence your decision?" Was this a planned publicity stunt? What do you say to accusations of exploiting a homeless woman's child? Marcus held Thomas close, shielding him from the cameras. The baby started crying at the noise. Back up. The lobby security formed a barrier around them. Let them through. Sarah's car waited outside. More cameras. More questions. Thomas wailed louder. It's okay, Marcus whispered, though his own heart was racing. We're almost there. In the car, Thomas gradually calmed down, sucking on the pacifier Mrs. Chen had provided. Marcus watched the familiar streets pass by, remembering another car ride, decades ago. His social worker driving him to meet his adoptive parents. The same fear. The same uncertainty. The police station was quieter, but not by much. Detective Martinez met them at the door. This way, she said, leading them to a small room. Social services is already here. Two women in suits waited inside. The older one stepped forward. Mr. Thompson. I'm Helen Ward from Child Protective Services. She looked at Thomas, who was falling asleep against Marcus's shoulder. We need to discuss placement options. He's been through enough today, Marcus said. Can't this wait? No, it can't. Helen's voice was firm but not unkind. We have a foster family ready. They're experienced with trauma cases. Trauma? Marcus felt his chest tighten. He's not traumatized. He's perfectly fine. Mr. Thompson. Detective Martinez stepped closer. You did a brave thing yesterday. But it's time to let the professionals take over. Marcus looked down at Thomas, peacefully sleeping, trusting him completely. The thought of handing him over to strangers made his stomach turn. What if? He took a deep breath. What if I applied to be his foster parent? The room went silent. Helen exchanged glances with her colleague. Mr. Thompson, she began carefully. Fostering is a serious commitment. The screening process alone takes months. And given your position, your schedule, I can change my schedule, and the current media situation. Detective Martinez added, the questions about your motives. Marcus felt something inside him harden. The same feeling he'd had at 18, when people said he'd never make it in business. Test me, he said. Screen me. Do whatever background checks you need. But don't tell me I can't do this because of what people might think. Thomas stirred, his small hand grabbing Marcus's collar. Like he was backing him up. Helen studied them both for a long moment. You'd need to take parenting classes. Have your home evaluated. Undergo psychological screening. Fine. And the media attention could be hard on him. Marcus thought of cameras, questions, accusations. I can protect him from that. Like you protected him from the flood? Helen's voice softened. That's what worries us, Mr. Thompson. You've known this child for less than 24 hours, and you're already willing to fight the world for him. Isn't that what parents do? The words hung in the air. Thomas sighed in his sleep, snuggling closer. Helen pulled out a thick folder. The paperwork for emergency fostering application. It's usually a last resort. But given the circumstances, Marcus took the folder with his free hand, careful not to disturb Thomas. This doesn't guarantee anything, Helen warned. We'll still need to complete a full home study, background checks I understand. Marcus looked down at Thomas, then back at her. But he's worth it. As they left the station an hour later, the media crowd had doubled. But this time, Marcus didn't feel shaken. He held Thomas close, ignoring the questions, the cameras, the doubt in people's eyes. Let them talk. Let them speculate. Let them dig up every detail of his past. They'd never understand anyway. They hadn't heard that cry in the storm. Hadn't felt that small hand grab their finger. Hadn't remembered what it felt like to be alone, waiting for someone to choose you. Marcus Thompson had spent his life building walls around his past. Now, holding a sleeping baby through another storm of cameras and questions, he realized something. Sometimes the strongest walls are the ones we tear down ourselves. The boardroom fell silent as Marcus finished speaking. 12 pairs of eyes stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Let me get this straight, Richard said finally. You're applying to be a foster parent. Yes, to the baby from the flood. His name is Thomas. Richard rubbed his temples. Marcus, the stock dropped 6 points this morning. It'll recover. Will it? Another board member, Janet, leaned forward. Our clients are already asking questions. About stability. About focus. About your judgment. Marcus opened the folder Helen had given him. My judgment was fine when I turned this company's profits around. When I expanded into Asian markets. When I dash. That was before you decided to become a single father overnight. The room erupted in overlapping voices. Marcus let them argue, checking his phone. A text from Sarah. Thomas is napping. Mrs. Chen says is fine. Enough. Marcus stood up. I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you my decision. We could force a vote, Janet warned. Question your fitness to lead. You could. But then you'd have to explain to the shareholders why you removed a CEO who just increased their dividends by 40%. He gathered his papers. And why you punished him for saving a child's life. Richard sighed. Marcus, please. Just think about this. I have thought about it. For 28 years. He left them sitting there, their protests fading behind him. His phone buzzed. Helen from CPS. Mr. Thompson? We need to discuss Thomas's first home study visit. When? Tomorrow morning. And there's something else. The mother wants to meet you. Marcus stopped walking. What? She's still in the hospital. Wants to thank you personally. Helen paused. It might help your application if you went. The elevator doors opened to his office floor. Sarah waited beside his desk, holding Thomas. He woke up crying, she explained. Only settled when I brought him here. Marcus took Thomas, who immediately grabbed his tie. Any other crises while I was gone? Just 3 news networks, 2 magazine requests, and 1 very persistent mommy blogger. She handed him a bottle. Oh, and social services called about Dash, the mother. I know. Marcus tested the bottle's temperature like Mrs. Chen had shown him. They want me to meet her. Are you going to? Thomas took the bottle eagerly, his dark eyes fixed on Marcus's face. I have to. He sat down, adjusting Thomas in his arms. She deserves to know who might raise her son. The hospital hallway smelled of disinfectant and old coffee. Marcus followed a nurse to room 412, Thomas sleeping against his shoulder. The woman in the bed looked younger than he expected. Thin, with Thomas's same dark skin and eyes. She sat up when they entered. You're him, she said softly. The man from the news. Marcus nodded. I'm Marcus Thompson. Her eyes fixed on Thomas. Can I? Marcus carefully placed Thomas in her arms. The baby stirred but didn't wake. I named him after my father, she said, touching his cheek. He was a good man. Always tried to help people. She looked up at Marcus. Like you? I just did what anyone would do. No. She shook her head. They wouldn't. Trust me. I know. She kissed Thomas's forehead. They told me you want to foster him. If they'll let me. They should. She handed Thomas back, wiping her eyes. I saw how you carried him through the flood. How you held him above the water. I couldn't leave him. That's why I chose the church, she said quietly. I thought someone good might find him. Someone who wouldn't leave. She met his eyes. I guess I was right. Marcus sat in the chair beside her bed. Tell me about him. What he likes. What makes him laugh. For the next hour, she shared everything. Thomas's favorite songs, his first words, how he loved being held while looking out windows. Marcus recorded it all in his phone, each detail precious. Finally, a nurse came to check her vitals. As Marcus stood to leave, she caught his hand. Promise me something. Anything. Tell him. She swallowed hard. Tell him his mother loved him enough to let him go. Marcus felt his throat tighten. I will. Back at the penthouse, Marcus walked Thomas around the empty rooms. Everything looked different now, full of sharp corners and unsafe edges. We'll have to baby-proof, he told Thomas, who was fascinated by his own reflection in the windows. Get you a proper crib. Toys. Maybe paint the guest room. His phone rang. Helen again. How did it go with the mother? Good. She. Marcus cleared his throat. She supports the foster application. That helps. But Mr. Thompson, there's still the matter of your schedule. Your lifestyle. Marcus looked around his pristine penthouse, designed for impressing clients, not raising children. I'm making changes, such as I'm promoting Sarah to Chief Operating Officer. She'll handle day-to-day operations. And I'm converting the home office into a nursery. A pause. The board approved this? They will. Tomorrow. After hanging up, Marcus sat in his favorite chair. Thomas dozing in his arms. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in colors he used to be too busy to notice. His phone buzzed with emails, interview requests, concerned clients, board members demanding explanations. He ignored them all. Instead, he opened a new email to all staff subject, personal announcement effective immediately. I am restructuring my role as CEO to accommodate personal changes in my life. Sarah Chen will be promoted to COO, handling daily operations. I will focus on strategic planning and major client relationships, working primarily from home. For those who have expressed concern about recent events, yes, I am applying to foster Thomas Walker. Yes, this will change how our company operates. And yes, I understand your doubts. But 28 years ago, someone took a chance on an orphan boy with nothing but determination. They changed my life by choosing to care more about potential than appearances. Now it's my turn to do the same. Regards, Marcus Thompson, CEO, Thompson Investment Group. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Thomas stirred, making the small sighing sound that Marcus already recognized as contentment. Big changes coming, little man, Marcus whispered. But we'll figure it out together. Outside, Palm Beach was settling into evening. Cars honked, people hurried home, life went on. But inside the penthouse, Marcus Thompson, CEO, millionaire, possible future father, held a sleeping baby and watched the sky change colors. Sometimes the biggest deals of your life, he realized, had nothing to do with money at all. Marcus sat in his darkened penthouse, watching Thomas sleep in the portable crib Mrs. Chen had brought over. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, but he barely noticed them. His laptop screen glowed with dozens of open tabs, foster parent requirements, child development stages, local pediatricians, baby-proofing services. He'd been researching for hours, ever since putting Thomas down for the night. The home study was scheduled for tomorrow morning. Everything had to be perfect. His phone lit up. Sarah calling. "You need to see this," she said when he answered. Channel 7. Marcus turned on the TV, keeping the volume low. A reporter stood outside his building. Sources close to the board suggest Thompson's decision to foster the child may be influenced by his own troubled past. Records show multiple behavioral incidents during his time in the state system, before his adoption at age 7. Marcus muted the TV, his hands shaking slightly. "They're digging deep," Sarah said softly. "Those records were supposed to be sealed. I was a kid, acting out after my parents died. I know that. But Marcus, they're painting a picture, suggesting you're unstable, unfit." Thomas stirred in his sleep, one tiny hand escaping the blanket. Marcus tucked it back in gently. "Let them talk. The board's calling another emergency meeting. Tomorrow morning. I won't be there. Home study. Remember." Marcus dash. "Good night, Sarah." He hung up and walked to the crib. Thomas slept peacefully, unaware of the storms brewing around him. Marcus touched his cheek softly, feeling the warmth of his skin. The TV still played silently, showing old photos of him as a child. Angry. Lost. Before the Thompsons found him. Before they gave him their name and a chance at a different life. His phone buzzed with a text from Helen. "Home study tomorrow, 9 a.m. Be prepared for detailed questions about your past." Marcus looked around his penthouse. He'd spent the day with a professional baby-proofing service, installing cabinet locks and outlet covers. The guest room was halfway converted into a nursery, its stark modern art replaced with soft colors and gentle shapes. But would it be enough? He opened his laptop again, staring at the foster parent requirements. Stability, routine, support system, all the things he'd never needed before. Thomas whimpered in his sleep. Without thinking, Marcus reached down and rubbed his back, humming that old orphanage song. The baby settled immediately. "You know something?" Marcus whispered. "I used to think success meant proving everyone wrong, showing them that orphanage kid could run with the big boys." He smiled sadly. "But that's not what you need, is it? You just need someone to stay." His phone lit up with more messages. Board members demanding responses. Reporters seeking comments. Clients threatening to pull accounts. Marcus ignored them all and opened a new email. To Richard Davidson, board chairman subject. "My decision, Richard. By now you've seen the news. My past is public, with all its messy details. You're probably wondering if I've lost my mind, or if I'm having some kind of breakdown. I'm not. 28 years ago, Elizabeth and James Thompson looked at a troubled kid with a bad record and saw something worth saving. They didn't care about appearances or what their friends would think. They just saw a child who needed them, Now I'm looking at Thomas, and I see the same thing. I understand if the board wants to remove me. But know this, I won't stop fighting for him. Not for publicity, not for redemption, but because 28 years ago, someone fought for me. Attached is my restructuring plan. Sarah can handle daily operations. I'll focus on key clients and strategy, working primarily from home. Your choice now. Marcus. He hit send and walked back to the crib. Thomas had kicked off his blanket again, stubborn even in sleep. Just like someone else he knew. Big day tomorrow, little man, Marcus said, adjusting the blanket. Think you can help me convince them? As if in answer, Thomas grabbed his finger in his sleep, holding on tight. The sun rose too quickly. Marcus had barely slept, spending the night alternating between checking on Thomas and rechecking the baby-proofing. Helen arrived precisely at 9 a.m., accompanied by another social worker. They looked impossibly young to be deciding his future. First, we'll need to see the proposed nursery, Helen said, pulling out a checklist. Marcus led them through the penthouse, pointing out safety features, emergency plans, the pediatrician's number posted on the fridge. Thomas watched from his playpen, occasionally babbling commentary. "And your work situation?" the other social worker asked. "We understand there are some concerns. I'm restructuring my role. Working from home mostly. Sarah, my COO, will handle daily operations. The same Sarah who's been helping with Thomas." "Yes, she's..." Marcus smiled as Thomas waved at him. "She's part of our support system." The inspections seemed to last forever. Every room examined. Every question answered. Every decision scrutinized. Finally, Helen sat down at the dining room table, spreading out her papers. "Mr. Thompson, we need to discuss your past. The orphanage records." "Yes. You understand our concerns." "I do." Marcus picked up Thomas, who had started fussing. "I also understand something else. Those records? They're exactly why I should be his foster father." Helen looked up sharply. "Explain." "I know what he's feeling. The confusion. The fear of being left alone. The need for stability." Thomas grabbed his tie, a familiar comfort gesture. "I know because I felt it too. And the behavioral issues showed I was hurting. That I needed someone to see past the anger to the scared kid underneath." Marcus met her eyes. "Like I see past Thomas's crying to what he really needs. Which is someone who won't give up on him. No matter what the papers say. No matter what anyone thinks." Helen watched as Thomas laid his head on Marcus's shoulder, completely trusting. "You understand this is just the beginning? There will be more visits. More questions. More scrutiny. Bring it on." She smiled slightly. "Your adoption records mentioned stubbornness as a key trait." "Still is." Helen closed her folder. "We'll be in touch within 48 hours with our decision." After they left, Marcus stood at the windows with Thomas, watching the city wake up. His phone buzzed, Richard responding to his email. "Board meeting results. Motion to remove you failed. 6-6. You can thank Janet. She switched her vote." Another text followed. "Don't make us regret this." Marcus looked at Thomas, who was fascinated by his own reflection in the window. "Hey, little man, want to help me redecorate this place? Make it look less like a magazine and more like a home?" Thomas responded by drooling on his $5,000 suit. Marcus laughed. "I'll take that as a yes." Outside, news vans still circled the building. His phone still buzzed with demands and questions. The future was still uncertain. But for the first time since the flood, Marcus Thompson felt completely sure of one thing. He was exactly where he needed to be. "And what would you do if the child has a tantrum in public?" the foster care instructor asked. Marcus sat in the back row of the parenting class, the only one wearing a suit. Thomas was with Mrs. Chen, his first time away from Marcus since the flood. "Stay calm," a young woman in the front answered. "Remove them from the situation if possible." "Good. Mr. Thompson, any thoughts?" All heads turned toward him. He'd gotten used to that lately. "Identify the trigger," he said. "Children don't act out without reason." The instructor nodded approvingly. "Speaking from experience?" "You could say that." His phone vibrated, a text from Mrs. Chen. "Is fine. Stop crying. Playing with blocks now." Marcus relaxed slightly. He'd been checking his phone every 5 minutes since dropping Thomas off. Separation anxiety goes both ways, the woman next to him whispered with a knowing smile. After class, the instructor pulled him aside. "Your answers show insight. Mr. Thompson, especially about understanding the reasons behind behavior. I had good teachers. My adoptive parents never gave up, even when I was at my worst. And now you're doing the same for Thomas. His phone buzzed again. Sarah this time. Client meeting in 20 minutes. Video conference from your home office. Marcus checked his watch. If he hurried, he could pick up Thomas first. The drive to Mrs. Chen's felt longer than usual. When he arrived, he heard Thomas's laugh from the doorway. Someone's been having fun, Mrs. Chen said, handing him over. He's a natural with other children. Marcus hugged Thomas close, breathing in his baby shampoo smell. Other children? My grandchildren came over. He shared all his toys. No prompting needed. Thomas babbled happily, showing Marcus a block he was holding. That's great, buddy. Really great. He turned to Mrs. Chen. Thank you for treating him like any other child. She smiled. That's what he needs, Mr. Thompson. Not the media circus outside your building. Back home, Marcus rushed to set up the video conference while Thomas played in his playpen nearby. The client was a conservative investment firm from Texas, old money with traditional values. Thompson, the client's face appeared on screen. Is that a baby I hear? Yes, Mr. Barnes. My foster son. Barnes frowned. Read about that in the papers. Quite a situation. If you're concerned about our firm's stability I'm concerned about focus, Thompson. About priorities. Thomas chose that moment to start crying. Marcus turned to check on him. He dropped his favorite stuffed elephant outside the playpen. Excuse me one moment, Marcus said, retrieving the toy. Thomas immediately stopped crying. When he turned back to the screen, Barnes was watching with an unreadable expression. You know, Thompson, my father used to say you can tell everything about a man by how he handles interruptions. I apologize for the unprofessional Don't. Barnes leaned forward. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Most men in your position would have handed that child off to someone else. Kept up appearances. Thomas isn't about appearances. No, he's not. Barnes smiled slightly. Double our investment. And Thompson? Bring him to the Dubai conference next month. My granddaughter's about his age. After the call, Marcus sat on the floor with Thomas, helping him stack blocks. You just helped close a $50 million deal, buddy. He caught the block Thomas threw. Not bad for a morning's work. His phone rang. Helen from CPS. How was class? Educational. Thomas did well with Mrs. Chen. Good. That's good. She paused. There's something we need to discuss. The press is requesting access to Thomas's case files. Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. Those are sealed. They are arguing public interest, given your position. They want to know more about his mother, his background. No, Mr. Thompson He's not a story, Helen. He's a child. Marcus watched Thomas concentrate on balancing another block. His history is his to share when he's old enough to choose. The court might not see it that way. Then I'll fight them. Like my parents fought to seal my records. That evening, Marcus sat in the newly finished nursery, rocking Thomas to sleep. The room had transformed from a stark guest space to something warm and personal. Photos lined the walls. Thomas playing, laughing, growing stronger every day. His phone lit up with another text from Sarah. Board meeting summary. Profits up 12% this quarter. Working from home isn't hurting anything. Marcus smiled. He'd done most of those deals with Thomas in his lap or playing nearby. Turned out babies were excellent judges of character. If Thomas didn't like someone on a video call, they usually turned out to be trouble. You're changing everything. You know that, he whispered to the sleeping baby. All my plans. All my routines. Thomas sighed in his sleep, clutching his elephant. But here's the thing. Marcus touched his cheek gently. You're making it all better. The night deepened outside. Marcus should have been reviewing reports, preparing for tomorrow's meetings. Instead, he sat in the dark nursery, watching his foster son sleep. His phone buzzed, a reminder about tomorrow's court date. Another hearing about Thomas's case files. Another battle to keep his son's story private. Son! The word had slipped into his thoughts so naturally, he hadn't even noticed. A text from Mrs. Chen. Don't forget drop-off is 9 a.m. tomorrow. Bring extra diapers this time. Marcus smiled. 6 weeks ago, he couldn't tell a diaper size from a stock price. Now he could change one in under 2 minutes. In the dark, half asleep. Adaptation, the foster care instructor had called it. The ability to reshape your life around someone else's needs. His phone lit up with another board memo, another client concern, another reporter's question. But for once, Marcus Thompson, CEO, millionaire, foster father, didn't feel pulled in too many directions. He felt centered, focused, clear. Because sometimes the biggest adaptations in life weren't about learning new skills or changing schedules. They were about finally becoming who you were always meant to be. The temporary custody approval letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Marcus read it 3 times. Thomas balanced on his hip, before the words finally sank in. "We did it, buddy," he whispered. Thomas responded by trying to eat the letter. Sarah arrived moments later, already typing on her tablet. "Conference call in 10 minutes. The Singapore deal dash," she stopped, seeing the letter in Marcus's hands. "Is that temporary custody approved?" Sarah's professional demeanor cracked. She hugged them both, making Thomas giggle. "We need to celebrate," she said, wiping her eyes. "Cancel the call. This is more important." Sarah dash. Marcus. She took Thomas, who immediately grabbed her necklace. "For once in your life, let business wait." They ended up at a small cafe near the beach, away from the usual business crowds. Thomas sat in a high chair, fascinated by everything around him. "The board meeting went well yesterday," Sarah said, helping Thomas with his banana slices. "Profits are steady. Clients are adjusting to the new normal. And the press mostly moved on to other stories. Though," she hesitated, "there's still interest in Thomas's background. His mother." Marcus watched Thomas figure out how to pick up smaller pieces of banana. His motor skills improved every day. "She made her choice," he said quietly. "We need to respect that." Their peaceful breakfast was interrupted by a call from Mrs. Chen. "Turn on the news," she said without preamble. Marcus pulled out his phone, loading the local news site. His stomach dropped. "Homeless mother seeks custody reversal," Sarah read over his shoulder, her face paling. "That's not possible. She signed the papers." "Apparently, she's claiming emotional distress," Mrs. Chen said, saying she felt pressured during the flood crisis. Thomas knocked over his sippy cup, milk spilling across the table. Marcus cleaned it up mechanically, his mind racing. "The hearing's tomorrow," Mrs. Chen continued. "Helen's already called twice." Marcus ended the call and looked at Thomas, who was happily smashing banana into the high chair tray, unaware that his world might be about to change again. "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked softly. Before Marcus could answer, Thomas started choking on a piece of banana. The world stopped. Marcus moved on instinct, grabbing Thomas from the high chair. The baby first aid training kicked in, one firm pat between the shoulder blades. Thomas coughed, the banana piece flying out. Then he started crying. Marcus held him close, his own heart racing. "It's okay, buddy. You're okay." Around them, the cafe had gone silent. Several people had their phones out, recording. "We need to go," Sarah said, already gathering their things. Back at the penthouse, Marcus paced the nursery with Thomas, who had fallen asleep after his scare. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. "Helen, the lawyers, the board." "Mr. Thompson," Helen said when he finally answered. "We need to talk strategy." She's his mother, Helen, who left him in a flood, because she thought it was best for him. Marcus touched Thomas's cheek, feeling his steady breathing. "She doesn't deserve to be demonized. This isn't about her reputation. It's about Thomas's stability." Thomas stirred, whimpering slightly. Marcus adjusted him, and he settled. "What do you need from me?" "Come to the office. Now. Bring all your documentation." Marcus looked down at his sleeping son. "I can't leave him. Not after this morning." "Marcus." Helen's voice softened. "If you want to keep him, you have to fight for him. That means doing hard things." Mrs. Chen arrived within minutes of his call. Thomas barely stirred during the transfer. "He's had a rough morning," Marcus explained, handing over the diaper bag. "If he seems upset dash, Marcus." Mrs. Chen smiled. "Go. Fight. We'll be fine." The CPS office felt colder than he remembered. Helen waited with 2 lawyers and a stack of papers. "We've reviewed everything," she said as he sat down. "Your case is strong. Stable home, financial security, strong support system. But she's his biological mother. And she has a compelling story, Homeless woman, crisis situation, powerful CEO involved. Marcus stared at the papers. Somewhere in that stack was the document that had started everything. A desperate mother's signature on a desperate day. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chen. He woke up. Asked for you. Asked for you. Thomas wasn't talking yet. Not really. But he had ways of making himself understood. The way he reached for Marcus when he was scared. How he calmed at the sound of his voice. I want to talk to her, Marcus said suddenly. The lawyers exchanged glances. That's not advisable, Not in court. Not with lawyers. Just talk. Helen studied him for a long moment. I'll see what I can arrange. The meeting happened that evening, in a small room at CPS. Thomas's mother looked better than she had in the hospital. Healthier, cleaner, but just as sad. He choked on a banana this morning, Marcus said quietly. She looked up sharply. Is he? He's fine. Scared me half to death. But he's fine. The first time they choke on something. She smiled slightly. You never forget it. No, you don't. They sat in silence for a moment. I'm not a bad mother, she said finally. I just couldn't give him what he needed. I know. The lawyers, they said I could fight. That people would sympathize. Marcus thought of Thomas in his nursery, surrounded by toys and love and stability. Is that what you want? She wiped her eyes. I want what's best for him. I've always wanted that. She looked at Marcus. That's why I left him near the church. I prayed someone good would find him. Someone did. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing her recent pictures. Thomas in his high chair. Thomas playing with blocks. Thomas sleeping in his crib. She touched the screen gently. He looks happy. He is. And you can be part of that, if you want. Not as his legal guardian, but as his mother. Someone he knows loves him enough to put his needs first. She stared at the photos for a long time. Then she pulled out a crumpled paper from her purse. The custody reversal request, she explained. I haven't filed it yet. Marcus watched as she tore it in half. Take care of my boy, she whispered. Back home, Marcus found Thomas and Mrs. Chen in the nursery. The baby's face lit up when he saw him. Da. Marcus froze. Mrs. Chen smiled. He's been practicing that all afternoon. Marcus picked up Thomas, who immediately snuggled into his shoulder. Da. He said again, more insistently. Yeah, buddy. Marcus's voice cracked. I'm here. I'm right here. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Marcus sat in the nursery reviewing the day's events. His phone showed missed calls from the board, from clients, from reporters wanting comments on the almost custody battle. None of it seemed important anymore, because today, his son had choked on a banana and been fine. His son's mother had chosen his happiness over her rights. His son had called him DA for the first time. Marcus Thompson, CEO, millionaire, father, sat in the dark nursery and realized something. Sometimes the biggest victories in life weren't the ones you fought for. They were the ones you earned by simply showing up, day after day, banana crises and all. The morning of the final custody hearing dawned bright and clear. No storms today. Marcus stood in Thomas's nursery, watching his son sleep peacefully in his crib. Da. Up. Thomas demanded as soon as he opened his eyes, standing wobbly but determined. 10 months had passed since the flood. 10 months of diaper changes, midnight feedings, and more joy than Marcus had ever thought possible. Big day today, buddy. Marcus lifted him out of the crib. Ready to make it official? Thomas responded by trying to stick his fingers in Marcus's mouth, his newest favorite game. Sarah arrived as Marcus was attempting to wrestle Thomas into his formal clothes, a tiny suit that matched his own. The press is already outside the courthouse, she said, taking over the dressing process with practiced ease. But security's ready. Marcus nodded, straightening his tie. The same one Thomas had drooled on all those months ago. Helen called, Sarah continued. Everything's in order. Medical records, home study reports, character references. And his mother. She'll be there, supporting the adoption. Thomas squirmed away from Sarah as soon as she finished dressing him, running to Marcus on unsteady legs. Da. Go. Marcus scooped him up. Yeah, buddy. We're going. The drive to the courthouse felt surreal. Thomas babbled in his car seat, pointing at everything they passed. His vocabulary grew daily. Car, bird, go, and most importantly, day. News vans lined the courthouse steps. Reporters called questions as they hurried inside. Mr. Thompson, any comment on today's hearing? How has this experience changed your business approach? What message do you have for other potential adoptive parents? Marcus kept Thomas's face turned away from the cameras, hurrying through the security checkpoint where Helen waited. Ready? She asked. We've been ready for months. The courtroom was smaller than he expected. Thomas's mother sat in the front row, wearing a neat dress, looking healthier than he'd ever seen her. She'd been attending counseling, working a steady job, visiting Thomas under supervision. She smiled at them as they passed. Thomas waved. Hi, baby, she whispered. The judge entered, a stern-looking woman with kind eyes. She reviewed the papers in front of her while Thomas played quietly with his stuffed elephant. Mr. Thompson, she said finally, this is an unusual case. Yes, Your Honor, a CEO of a major corporation, adopting a child he found during a natural disaster. She peered at him over her glasses. Some might call it impulsive. Marcus felt Thomas lean against him, trusting and warm. With all due respect, Your Honor, finding Thomas wasn't impulsive. It was instinct. He took a deep breath. Everything after the classes, the home studies, the life changes, that was choice. Deliberate choice. And your company, the board's concerns, have been addressed. We've restructured, adapted. Marcus smiled as Thomas showed the judge his elephant. Actually, our client satisfaction rates have improved. Turns out people trust a company that values family. The judge turned to Thomas's mother. And you support this adoption? She stood, straightening her dress. I do. Because. Her voice cracked. Because Marcus Thompson didn't just save my son from a flood. He showed him what a father should be. Thomas, hearing his mother's voice, reached for her. Without hesitation, Marcus let her take him. Hi, sweet boy, she whispered, hugging him close before handing him back. Mama loves you. Love, Thomas repeated, one of his newest words. The judge watched this exchange, her stern expression softening. Mr. Thompson, when you filed for emergency fostering 10 months ago, many questioned your motives. The press suggested publicity stunts. The board worried about stability. She closed her folder. But I've reviewed every report, every evaluation, every progress note. She smiled at Thomas, who was now trying to share his elephant with her. And I've seen something remarkable, a man who didn't just provide a home for a child in need. A man who rebuilt his entire life around that child's happiness. Marcus held Thomas closer. Furthermore, the judge continued, you've maintained a respectful relationship with his biological mother, ensuring Thomas knows is loved by many people. She picked up her pen. That, Mr. Thompson, is what real parenting looks like. She signed the papers with a flourish. By the power vested in me by the state of Florida, I hereby grant the petition for adoption. Thomas Walker is now legally Thomas Walker Thompson. The courtroom erupted in quiet applause. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. Helen beamed. Thomas, not understanding the commotion but feeling the joy, threw his elephant in celebration. DA. Up. Marcus lifted him high, not caring about the photographers outside or the board meeting later or anything except this moment. Because this moment? This was everything. Later that evening, after the celebrations and congratulations, after Sarah and Mrs. Chen and all their supporters had gone home, Marcus sat with Thomas in the nursery. The room had evolved over the months. Professional photos mixed with finger paintings. Designer furniture shared space with plastic toys. A CEO's sanctuary transformed into a child's paradise. You know something? Marcus said as Thomas played with blocks on his lap. 10 months ago, I thought I was rescuing you. Thomas looked up at him with those bright, trusting eyes. But the truth is, buddy. Marcus kissed his forehead. You rescued me right back. His phone buzzed. Probably more congratulations. More press requests, more business demands. But Marcus Thompson, CEO, millionaire, and now officially a father, didn't reach for it. Instead, he sat with his son in the quiet nursery, building block towers and knocking them down, laughing at the simple joy of being exactly where they belonged. Outside, Palm Beach continued its glittering life. Inside, a different kind of wealth filled every corner. The wealth of a baby's laugh. The wealth of tiny hands reaching up. The wealth of finally, completely, being home. Marcus had spent his life building an empire of numbers and deals. But his greatest achievement sat in his lap, smashing blocks and giggling. Because sometimes the richest moments in life aren't the ones you plan for. They're the ones that find you, floating in flood waters, waiting to change everything.